course, for Europe and Europe's sovereignty and also for the defense sector, the micro launches are a major issue. Of course, we want them to succeed. And we collaborate with them in the field of testing. And actually, our space agency has been instrumental in launching the competition, which has been the basis for their growth and for attracting venture capital, where they have been extremely successful. And we are very proud that our space agency really had that great idea. And that there are really these teams in Germany who have been so successful.
Hey SpaceWatchers, and welcome to our series of reflections on 2025. Today, I have the honor to welcome Professor Dr. Anke Kaysser-Pyzalla, chairwoman of the DLR, the German Aerospace Center. And in her capacity, she is heading the activities of the entire research organization of the DLR. That includes much more areas than just space, but space is what we will focus about, because we are SpaceWatch.Global. Anke, how are you doing today?
Great, thanks a lot. Well, of course, I have some views on space also.
And these are the views we are interested in. Let's talk about this year, which is almost in its final days, and see 2025 as a turning point. Did 2025 fundamentally change how the DLR understands its role in national security and space defense research?
Actually, it did not. We have been doing research and defense and also in security, civil security, for more than 40 years. So that was already in our founding as the German Aerospace Center, one of the major topics we have pursued. And we have, of course, grown in that sector with respect, for instance, to port security and other topics which are not in aerospace, but in the maritime sector. But nevertheless, defense and security have always been at our heart. And we are partly funded also by the Ministry of Defense. And of course, also in the defense sector and in their funding, in particular the maritime sector, has been growing. What we have, of course, strengthened as the path from civil security research into also the military domain. And it's clear that we have been increasingly in the focus of media attention. So before, the interest in what we did in that sector was pretty minimal. We have said publicly that we do security and defense research since 2020. So well before the war on Ukraine by Russia. And we've seen that really a public has increasingly got interested in that subject.
Let's pick up on that thread thought. You mentioned that the DLR is obviously a civil research organization by its heart. But as we spoke, space security is now unavoidable. And how do you define DLR's role today in this defense-related space research? Can you go into that area a bit more?
I probably wouldn't say we're a civil organization at our heart, because as we are funded by the Ministry of Defense, and that has been a funder of DLR since its beginning, the Ministry of Defense and what it needs and what the armed forces need, of course, is at our heart too. So it's not just civil. I think the majority of our research in the civil sector, nevertheless, both aspects are dearly to us. And the fact that I, as a CEO, are responsible for security and defense also really is a clear statement and has been that statement since 2020, also well before the war on Ukraine. Yeah, as a civil or with civil research, we do research that is really the basis in order to be also at the forefront of research in the defense sector. So we have to be at the forefront of research, for instance, in Earth observation when it comes to meaningful data and also to interpretation, for instance, of geographical situations, questions about, say, the impact of war on, for instance, urban infrastructures or catastrophes on urban infrastructures. And then you need to have really civil research at the forefront. And that then can be translated into questions which are of military significance. And of course, we need that close collaboration that we have with the armed forces and also with the defense industry in order to shape research and to shape the civil research and the dual use part in order to build the basis for our defense research. And defense research as such in the German system is an add-on. So that's the part which is funded by the Ministry of Defense. And there, the research which we do really aims at being useful for the armed forces as soon as possible. That's something which is not always easy. Because it's quite a difference from having great research results in the lab to having great operational results outdoors. But that's something which we always keep in our mind and where we very early on see the targets that we have if you go into the outdoors. For instance, that means also if you look at codes which you develop in aviation for the civil case, and which also will be used in order to the design of fighter aircraft. So that's also something which we consider at the very early stage also in the civil research that we want to use it later onwards also in defense research.
Let me clarify on that. So we're not just talking about dual use applications or research. We are also talking pure military contracted research. So what is then restricted, what is not going to the public, what is not even will find its way back. It's really targeted for the forces. Is that understanding correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, dual use, from my point of view, it's quite difficult to do.
Where are the limits that you or that the DLR sees? Or let's rephrase it. Are there limits on the research, on the defense research side that you have at the DLR?
Yeah, sure. Of course. We always, of course, abide to the law. That's clear. And of course, we don't do any operations. So operations are, of course, done by the armed forces and we support, but we are not part of the armed forces.
Sure, that's clear. But another question to clarify, when we talk about space terms TRL level, I understand that usually the DLR starts from base research to a TRL level of 4, 5, 6-ish maybe. Are you going further when it comes to the military clients? Are they really getting a product, subsystem, solution from you that you hand over?
So it's not just products, it's procedures. And we also talk about analytics and also about things like decision support and these kind of things. If, say, a fighter aircraft is developed, of course, our major partners are in the European industry sector along the whole chain, starting from SMEs up to the large OEMs. And so that's pretty clear that in that case, we have an extremely strong collaboration with them. On the other hand, also our knowledge and our technologies are thought after with respect rather to analytics and also on evaluation and procedures and these kind of things. So there is not only the product, but there's also the processes, there's the analytics and many more tasks that we do and that we have.
That means that your research is turning into real capabilities then at the end.
Yes.
Because on the civil side, there's usually when it comes to a product or a capacity that is then going to the market, that will be then a spin-off or so, where you also have great stories to tell. So laser light, what became then Mineric or so technologies that were developed. Okay.
Yes.
I see.
Yes, we also collaborate, of course, with startups in the defense sector. But of course, we have to make sure with whom we work. And we also have to make sure that the knowledge and the expertise, as well as the technologies that we provide, are kept in Europe and are benefiting our partners in the NATO. And that's, of course, a task which is harder in the defense sector than in other sectors. And there we have to make sure that we really comply with what we need to do. And that's actually something where the question about startups is a bit different than in other fields.
Can you pinpoint to a few technologies that you're working on in that sector? So you talked about procedures, you talked about the startups you're working with. Can you allude a bit in that direction?
Yeah, so of course for Europe and Europe's sovereignty and also for the defense sector, the micro launches are a major issue. Of course, we want them to succeed. and we collaborate with them in the field of testing. And actually, our space agency has been instrumental in launching the competition, which has been the basis for their growth and for attracting venture capital, where they have been extremely successful. And we are very proud that our space agency really had that great idea, and that there are really these teams in Germany who have been so successful.
I have to jump in here. When you talk about launchers, our German micro launchers, if I'm not mistaken, then high impulse routes came from DLR, and at least the Polaris founder for the space plane has a DLR routes. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So Impulse has been founded by co-workers in the DLR, and that was, I think, soon after they left, or even when they still were at DLR. Polaris is a bit different. So the founders have been in DLR, but then Polaris was founded after they left DLR. Yeah. And that's something we are quite proud of those, but also, of course, we have high opinions and high expectations of either, and also of Rocket Factory. But also in other fields, as you think about space situational awareness, there is, for instance, Okapi Orbits we're working together with, and there's a number of others. And if you go for technology, basically whatever there is in space, as if you want to term it dual use, there's always, beside the economy component, also a defense component in that, basically in all these technologies. And I think Minister Pistorius has quite highlighted that with his announcement about the investment into space infrastructure.
You were reading my mind, I have to say. I was about to ask what this announcement, the 35 billion in the next 5 years, it changed on your end, or was it just, and hey, nice to know, and we just continue on our path. So how surprised have you been?
We were quite surprised actually about this sum. So we have been expecting that investments into space in the military sector would increase. But we never dreamt about that amount. We think it's really important because the forces have been quite sure and have been also telling both the government and the public for a long term already that it's necessary to invest into defense and space. But of course, that was understood. However, the budget never was allocated. And now the budget has been allocated, and we all have to deliver. That means the economy, but that means also everybody else who can support this. And we are among those. And so we all have to speed up and to make sure that we do the right thing. And there is quite a number of discussions, and we have already seen quite some initiatives, and we as DLR will do whatever we can to support this.
This huge amount that we just talked about opens, of course, new opportunities. And I think at the moment, the ministry and all the involved entities are looking in where to go. From a research point of view, or from a DLR research point of view, where is Germany's biggest space security research gap today?
What we would really love to see is that robotic missions become really a focal point. And research is always on what you can do today, or what you have not shown that is possible today, what you think, or what you probably as an organization strongly believe is possible, or it has not been shown so far. And we are quite sure that in the space robotics sector, we, and together with the companies in Europe, are able to do a lot more. And that's something which is both of significance to civil security, to securing our space assets, as well as to the defense sector. And we would very much be interested in a mission in that field to be launched quite soon, or even a number of various missions where we see important possibilities. And that's something where we lobby, which is maybe not that obvious as other fields such as secure communication, secure navigation, or Earth observation aspects.
It's interesting that you mentioned robotics. I just came from the EU ISO's strategic forum the last days in Munich, and there were one of the spin-offs we haven't mentioned before, Kinetics, which I think is a spin-off of the robotic part in Oberpfaffenhofen with their arm. And there are also missions that the EU is planning. So from Adrios, where Germany also has a lead to the ISO's 4i mission or so. So robotic When we talk about in-orbit servicing or even the Guardian satellites or whatever, everything what comes then down to rendezvous and proximity operations that need at the end of the day a kind of robotic. How well is DLR positioned in that compared to a European context or an international context even?
We have always developed the DLR. Unfortunately, we didn't have the possibility to fly it. We are involved in all the European consortia. We are involved in excellent clusters with respect to robotics on the German and European scale. We will also have a strong demonstration about robotics in the European Parliament next year. And in space robotics, of course, also due to the exploration missions, talk about MMX with the JAXA or other with NASA, where we have contributed major parts. I think we are really at the forefront. We have also shown that we are able to control robots on Earth from the ISS quite recently. This year, a very successful experiment was a robotic swarm in Oberpfaffenhofen. And we think all the components are there, but what we really need is the missions to prove it. And what we really think is also that these are quite important missions for the defense sector.
We just spoke about robotics, but are there other research gaps that you would see when it comes to quantum sensors in Earth observation or whatever fancy stuff we might think now?
I mean, there's huge expectation on quantum, say quantum sensors, say quantum computing. And of course, we're involved in that. These are all technologies that will be very important on a medium-term perspective. And as with the question of quantum key distributions, we already perform experiments and we already have quite interesting results. And that's also going to be something which we're going to pursue as well as, for instance, inertial sensing.
Let's have a look ahead into next year. What will be the first real test in 2026 for Germany's space defense ambitions? How would you see it from the DLR point of view?
I think successful start of the micro launches will be something which we all expect and hope for. So that will be very important. We have a satellite on orbit for maritime security, which has been successfully launched and which had a successful LEO phase. And we're going to see how that one is going to perform as DLR. So that's important for us. That's the other satellites. And there is quite a number of projects also on its way. Among them was a higher altitude platform. Not quite sure that's going to start within 2026. It depends a bit. Could be late 2026. Might also be early 2027, depending a bit also on meteorological conditions. As it's a first start, so you want to make sure that one works. And we have also reusable rocket starts looking forward to in Australia together with our Australian friends. And there's much more.
How would success look like from the DLR point of view?
I think that in fact for Germany and Europe as a whole, it's not only the success of missions and the success of these micro launches, but it's in particular, we have a new strategy for space security and defense in Germany, and that one really needs to come into action. So it needs to become operational, and that will be really the major success. To get that operational, to get all the major players involved and performing on target, that will be the major success that we expect to happen in 2026. And also that, of course, needs to be together with our partners in Europe and also, of course, with partners in NATO. And I think that's really on a more European and more global scale what is going to be the major target and I hope the major success within the next year.
I can't leave you off the hook here without asking one question about your personal highlight in 2025. What was it?
It's quite difficult. We had so many. Probably my highlight was really the successful commanding of the robotics world. And there was also my personally favorite robot. Why we had the start of building our new center, in fact, in Oberpfaffenhofen for our navigation and also part of our communication research. And I could do that with the Bavarian Prime Minister and my favorite robot. And that was something actually quite special. And at the same time, we've seen all over Germany really enthusiasm for space. So I hope I don't offend anybody else. But that was really the first thing that came to my mind. But of course, there were numerous other highlights, and also highlights on the European and international scale. I was at the expo in Japan together with Steinmeier. That was fantastic. And our colleagues from JAXA really did a wonderful job at the expo with respect to highlighting the space sector. And we had a wonderful event there on the international scale. It was just fantastic.
Okay, thank you very much for your time and for the review of this year and this outlook. I'm looking forward to work with you and your team in the years to come, or especially now in the next year. I wish you Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
The same to you, Thorsten, and I really look forward to see you at the next space event.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
And if you have further questions, reach out to us at radio@SpaceWatch.Global. If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Thorsten Kriening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.